vulnerable, where there are no formal procedures locally to pass funding from the NHS into local government services, into local authorities, particularly as we seek to reduce hospital backlogs. We're vitally important that we get people out of hospital and into the appropriate care settings. So can my right honourable friend assure me that where local authorities are seeking to do that, seeking to tackle those backlogs, they'll have access to appropriate funding to be able to do it as we go forward?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. Of course, we are already putting in record amounts of funding, both for local authorities to deal with the backlog that my honourable friend talks of, and into the NHS. But I do believe that with the plans that we set out earlier this month in the new plan for integration of NHS and local authority services for care, they will make a real difference.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his references to the work going on in Northamptonshire over health and social care integration. Can he assure me that that central role for local government in ensuring health and social care services work together to make the most efficient use of local resources will continue, and give me a clear guarantee that adult social care will not be taken over by the NHS?
Secretary of State.
I'm pleased to give my honourable friend that assurance that he seeks. The integration white paper, that signals our intention to go further and faster on health and care integration, building on the work that's already being done by the NHS, by adult social care and by local government, jointly to deliver services. That plan will lead to better collaboration, and we want to make sure that responsibility, though, overall still lies, as it is currently shared, between local authorities and the NHS.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State will know that Walsall Manor has been merged with Royal Wolverhampton. They share the same chief executive and chairman, without consultation with local people. How on earth can integration take place when Walsall Manor doesn't have a full-time chief executive who can ensure that this happens? Could the Secretary of State please ensure that Walsall Manor gets their own chief executive?
Mr Speaker, I do understand the point the Honourable Lady is making, but it is about what works on the ground, and my understanding is that what's happening locally in her area is about a shared management team where they're sharing best practice and trying to look at challenges together rather than any kind of formal merger.
All right.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Across the country, tens of thousands of people sit in hospital, medically fit to go home, but can't due to a lack of social care. And the Health and Care Bill should have addressed this, but didn't do. So, rather than just making us wait for more legislation, will the Secretary of State at least concede that local health leaders, be they in CCGs or in ICSs in shadow form, should be driving this locally as a matter of urgency?
Mr Speaker, this is exactly what the new integrated care systems, the ICSs, are all about. My understanding is the Honourable Gentleman sat on the Bill Committee for the bill that's currently in front of Parliament to make that a reality.
Come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Jake Murray. Went straight to.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and he clearly had a happy Easter. Look, Mr Speaker, the fact is that the government's failure to fix the social care crisis is causing huge pressures on the NHS. As of last week, more than 20,000 patients were in hospital, fit to leave, but could not be discharged because the care isn't available. That means 22,000 patients waiting more than 12 hours in A&E each month. That means heart attack and stroke victims have to wait over an hour for an ambulance. So we're used to hearing about a winter crisis. Isn't it the case that after more than a decade of underinvestment in the NHS, a failure to fix social care, and the absence of a plan to even address the staffing challenge in the NHS or in social care, we don't just have a winter crisis, we have a permanent crisis in the NHS?
It's not the case at all, Mr Speaker. And the Honourable Gentleman will know, and he does know this, Mr Speaker, although he pretends not to, that the NHS and social care are facing unprecedented pressure because of the pandemic. He will know, as a result of the pandemic, that both in NHS settings and in adult social care there has been a necessity for infection protection controls. He will know that staff absences are sadly higher than they have been in normal times, but the NHS is stepping forward with their colleagues in adult social care to provide whatever support that they can bring, especially with the record funding that the government is providing both to the NHS and adult social care.
Jake Murray.
Mr. Speaker, working with my honourable friend, the member for Hyndburn, we have been working with East Lancashire local authorities and our GP services to see if we can increase the number of face-to-face GP appointments. Will my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, say what action he and the government are taking to ensure people in East Lancashire can see their general practitioner face-to-face?
My honourable friend, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely right to raise this issue. We've heard it time and time again in this chamber that the pressures our constituents are facing in order to get that kind of face-to-face access to their GPs. We all know why the situation was particularly bad at the height of the pandemic. We expect it to improve rapidly. The percentage being seen face-to-face is increasing substantially, and that's in large part because of the measures the government has taken, including the £250 million Access Fund that was announced a few months ago.
SNP spokesperson Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Integration and service improvement cannot be delivered without sufficient staff, and the only way to attract people to a career in social care is by valuing them. In Scotland, they are already paid better than those in England and Wales. And through the National Care Service, the Scottish Government will improve terms and conditions for care workers through the introduction of national paid bargaining. Has the UK Government considered following the Scottish Government's approach and commitments?
Same State.
Integration between the NHS and social care requires the right level and quality of workforce, both in the NHS and in adult social care. In the NHS in England, we have more doctors and nurses, more people working than ever before. In adult social care, we are recruiting at high levels, not least because of the huge recruitment campaign that we ran together with the sector, and also some of the other changes we made, including the £400 million plus of retention funding over the winter period, and the support for workforce more generally is making a real difference.
Peter Bell.
Mr. Speaker, in Northamptonshire, integration is getting on very well, and in fact, Councillor Helen Harrison heads the adult social services. But going back to what my honourable friend from Northampton South said, there is the worry that because the NHS is so big that it will overwhelm local government. No, they don't. I told you, Secretary of State, they don't want to mess with Helen Harrison, but could you assure that there's a mechanism for reviewing that?
So State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend knows Helen Harrison extremely well, but he's right to talk about the importance of working together between the NHS and the adult social care sector and local authorities, but at the same time making sure it's a true partnership and one does not overwhelm the other, but they work together towards their shared interests.
Alan Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the key causes of the urgent care crisis in Shropshire in Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust is the inability to discharge patients who are medically fit to go home into social care in the community. And Shropshire Council's resource challenges are well known, I think, in that area. I wonder if the Secretary of State can commit to putting extra resource into that area, into social care in Shropshire, so that the medically fit can be discharged into the community when they're ready.
So State.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady is absolutely right to raise this issue, and the whole House heard just before the recess the results of the work done, the independent work by Donna Ockenden, and she's right to talk about that and the pressure that's been faced locally. I do understand that she's already reached out to my honourable friend, the Health Minister, and he will be meeting with her to discuss just that.
Comment.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The dental activity threshold has recently been raised to 95% of usual activity, which is another quarter-on-quarter increase to get us towards pre-pandemic levels of 100% of activity. But I fully recognise that before the pandemic, access to NHS dentistry was patchy, and the crux of this problem is the current NHS dental contract. So work is underway to reform this contract. Negotiations negotiations have started, so I'm limited in what I can further say on this, but I will update the House as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A number of my constituents are finding it impossible to get access to NHS dental care, including Alison, one of my constituents who worked as a midwife in NHS Hospital for 40 years. Some of them have contacted 40 different practices and haven't got anywhere. My understanding is there's been a 30% drop in the dentists taking on NHS work in Suffolk. Will the Minister explain to me what local work has been going on between the Department and the local NHS bodies to try and ensure that this is addressed? Good question.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He is quite right, and he's campaigning very hard to increase dental activity in his constituency. One of the key pieces of work is through Health Education England, who set out a range of recommendations in their Advancing Dental Care Review, which will do a number of things, such as increasing the skill mix and scope of practitioners across dental teams, and we may be, while it needs require legislation to bring some of that work forward, they're introducing more flexible routes into dental training, and they're also doing some workforce modelling to identify the parts of the country with the biggest gaps so we can establish centres of dental development in those areas. And I will look at Ipswich in particular.
Emma Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent contacted me to tell me that she'd broken her canine. When she went to contact her NHS dentist, she found she'd been kicked off the list, was looking at facing a bill of £4,000 to pay privately, which she simply doesn't have. I wonder what the Minister can do to speak to some of the dental practices about perhaps relaxing their rules around when people get kicked off their dental lists, especially since it's just been COVID and there might be legitimate reasons for patients missing appointments.
I'm sorry to hear about the Honourable Lady's constituents' experience. There isn't actually a list system for dentists as there are for GPs. Patients can see any dentist when they have a dental issue. That said, we have asked dental practices to update their availability for NHS patients on the website. I was looking at the website this morning to see availability across the country, and many dentists still haven't updated their availability. So I'll ask officials, particularly in her constituency, to update those lists so patients can access NHS dentistry more easily.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I join the Minister in thanking dentists and their associates for getting so much of the service back? Will she agree with me that in places like the Arran parts of my constituency, where people can't find a dentist, haven't been able to for 2 or 3 years, that there must be a way they can get on a dentist list and get treated, and that they should be properly rewarded? Dentists and patients would be grateful for a change in the contract.
Minister.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Father of the House? He is quite right that the crux of the problem is that there isn't a shortage of dentists across the country. There's a shortage of dentists taking on NHS work, and the contract is the nub of the problem. And that's why we have started work underway to reform the contract. And there will be some short-term changes being announced shortly, and some longer-term reforms as well, which hopefully will help his constituents.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, bearing in mind that dentists are now determined to turn their practices wholly private as they can't make ends meet with NHS prices, will the Minister pledge to review NHS payments to stop this hemorrhaging of NHS dentistry provision?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of view. He is correct that the units of dental activity payments are a perverse disincentive. So sometimes when someone needs more extensive work, their dentist is paid the same as say, for 1 or 2 simple fillings. And that is the nub of the problem, and that is something that we're in negotiations about at the moment.
My honourable friend, the Minister, is absolutely right to talk about the contracts that we have with dentists, but should she not also be looking at the way in which dentistry is structured and the regional nature of the contracting, because it's outside of our clinical commissioning groups, which reduces coordination, reduces accountability, and something which is central to our health. Shouldn't this change?
Minister.
I thank the right honourable lady. She is right, and part of Health Education England's review of the overall system of where dentists are trained and where they fill the gaps is being addressed in their Advancing Dental Care Review. And they're also working with commissioners at a local level to develop more opportunities in those places which we term dental deserts, where there is a lack of provision at the moment.
Shadow Minister from
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, NHS dentistry is in crisis. Patients are stuck with a never-ending wait for an NHS appointment or footing the bill for going private, which is simply not an option for most families suffering with rising bills and taxes. With a third of the population suffering from untreated tooth decay, when is this government, who have had 12 years, finally going to come up with some practical solutions that put the needs of patients first, rather than the half-baked and unworkable ideas we have heard to date?
Minister.
Well, I'm sorry to hear the tone from the Honourable Lady. It is actually the 2006 Labour dental contract that we're working under. She may have missed that for the last 2 years, during the pandemic, dentists weren't able to offer any routine care, and we've slowly had to work that up to 95% of usual activity. And she may want to play politics with this issue. Perhaps she wants to talk to her Labour colleagues who run the NHS in Wales, where 6% of dental posts were lost last year. So before she lectures this side of the House, maybe she needs to get her own side in order.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the exception of the last question, I don't think that anybody on both sides of the House who've raised this issue are playing politics with it. There is clearly a pattern emerging here of a backlog in NHS dentistry and access to it problem. I have an increasing number of constituents contacting me who've gone to their NHS dentist with an acute dental problem to be told they're no longer seeing NHS patients, and people who've fallen off the list, as the lady from Hull mentioned. So how can ministers help in the short term? And I know the long-term answer is around the contract. I used to give that answer too when I was in her seat. Will the minister meet with me over a cup of tea so that we can try and, as a start of a 10, get to the bottom of this, please?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. We've had many cross-party meetings with colleagues on the issue of dentistry, and many have raised constituency issues with me, and we have followed those up. The two things that I would suggest to him is firstly to speak to his local commissioners, because there is sometimes a problem with local commissioning of dental services, but I'm hoping he'll find now we're moving to 95% of usual activity, which is a significant change since last year, that his constituents will be able to access services more easily.
Steve McKay.
Number 4, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earwax services are the responsibility of local commissioners, who are responsible for meeting their local healthcare needs. And depending on the arrangement of the local area, services should either be undertaken at local primary care practices or referred to appropriate local NHS services.
Steve McKay.
Well, obviously I want to thank the Minister for that answer, but I was recently contacted by a constituent who complained that he was told by her GP surgery that such services were no longer available on the NHS and she should consider obtaining them privately. This despite recent studies which link the effect of impacted cerumen on cognitive decline and dementia. In those circumstances, will she consider writing to clinical commissioning groups and reminding them of their obligations and patient entitlements?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his answer. There is no national removal of earwax removal services. They can be commissioned still locally, and NICE guidance are very clear on the types of services that should be being commissioned. Traditional methods of manual ear syringing are no longer offered for safety reasons, but methods such as electronic irrigation or microsuction should be being offered. If his local commissioning group are not commissioning those services, I'm very happy to meet with him and them to discuss why not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For decades, GPs did provide this service, and we all understand, because of NICE guidance, why they no longer offer syringing. But I have to say to my honourable friend, there is a gap in that many clinical commissioning groups are not doing this. We're talking about people with dementia, we're talking about people at end-of-life care who literally cannot hear and are going deaf. And I do think she needs to be very direct with clinical commissioning groups on this issue.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his raising this point. He's absolutely right. There needs to be some consistency across the country in how these are being commissioned. And after questions today, I am taking this up with officials to see why this isn't happening consistently across the country.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
So stay.
Mr. Speaker, I'm determined to tackle unfair disparities in health outcomes, which is why I launched the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. OHID's regional directors of public health will work with local government and the wider health system to empower local partners with the tools that they need to respond to disparities in their regional and local areas. And we will also be publishing a health disparities white paper later this year with a strong focus on prevention to improve health for the whole population.
Secretary of State for his answer, but the reality is a decade of underinvestment and mismanagement has meant 4.5 million people are on waiting lists and over 100,000 people shortages of staff before we even entered the pandemic. That exacerbated health inequalities, and while I welcome his announcement about the work that his department's doing, the reality is if you live in a constituency like mine, you're twice as likely to end up on waiting lists for over a year for treatment than those in better off areas. So while I welcome what he's announced today, can I ask that he puts in appropriate investment to go along with tackling these appalling health inequalities?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to talk about the importance of tackling health inequalities, and I think on that we absolutely agree, and I hope she will help contribute to the health disparities white paper I mentioned a moment ago. But I do think it's wrong of her to suggest that some of the current challenges we face is because of underinvestment or a smaller workforce than otherwise. We have the largest investment ever going into the NHS. Its budget this year is bigger than the GDP of Greece. It's the highest amount ever, rising by billions each year. We have more going to social care as well than ever before, and we have the highest level of workforce the NHS has ever seen in its history.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Surely one of the most cruel health inequalities lies in fertility treatment. Of the 106 CCGs in the country, only six limit the age at which women can have IVF treatment to 35, and 2 of those are in Hampshire. Would the Secretary of State meet with me to discuss how we can end this most devastating of postcode lotteries?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Of course, I'll be very happy to meet with her and discuss this further. But I can also tell her that this is one of the key things that we will be covering in our new upcoming women's health strategy.